Hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion. I'm Aaliyah Pollock, and I work as an AI data and technology analyst at RICS, also known as the Royal Institution for Chartered Surveyors. For those of you who might not be familiar, RICS is a professional body that's been around for around 150 years, and we work across the world to set standards, provide advice, and support professionals in creating sustainable, resilient, and inclusive built environments. In my role here at RICS, I'm responsible for analysing the impacts of AI, data and technology on the built and natural environments. And as part of that, I manage the RICS Tech Partner Programme. And what we do here is we produce thought leadership content, aiming to bridge the gap between the surveying profession and tech innovators. Today, we're here to break down what we really mean by PropTech and why it matters. You've probably heard the term thrown around a lot, and it can feel a bit like a buzzword at times. So our goal here is to really demystify what we mean, make sense of the hype, and focus on the real value that it brings to the property industry. But before we dive into this discussion, let's quickly introduce our panelists. So we'll go around one by one and do some introductions. So Ian, if you don't mind, would you like to start?
Super. Thanks, Aaliyah. Yes, and great to be on the panel today. So my name is Ian McGuinness, and I head up the research analytics team within Knight Frank. So I oversee a team of data engineers, data scientists, and geospatial specialists. And this team is tasked with applying a number of techniques and methodologies to understand interconnected facets of the property market. So relationships between people, places, and prices, obviously. We are certainly regarded within the property space as a centre of insight, centre of excellence for thematic and geographical inquiry. But we spend a lot of time developing our statistics and natural language processing techniques around that. And a lot of time and effort goes on visualization and indeed communication of those concepts. So we've been involved with the RICS Tech Partners program since its inception. I think it's a really exciting idea because we are required, in order to be credible with our own client base, to be very open and transparent about our methodology, the data that we're using, and how we are reaching the conclusions that inform decisions about how capital is directed on the ground. So we welcome any and every opportunity to talk to partners at an industry, be they established partners like Knight Frank or smaller, nimble technology providers, or everything in between, about how we reach consensus, standards, data governance, utility, the full gamut. So yes, that's a little bit of an intro.
Thank you. And Edwin?
Hi, so my name is Edwin Chomer. I am an associate tenor in Townsend. We are predominantly a construction consultancy, and we specialise in a number of services that we offer clients within the built environment. Within the real estate business that amalgamates our project management and cost management service, we underwent a process in about 2019 to digitalise a lot of our core processes. So that sort of kick-started our digital transformation. We launched our infrastructure called the Hive, in which we collect all the data that we're working on in relation to the people who work at Turner & Townsend and the projects and programs that we work on. As part of that process, we've developed a number of applications that we've rolled out internally in the business that we use to report on projects, so be that the project management app that we use to report on projects from a project management perspective, our cost control app that we can then manage costs throughout the life cycle of the project from feasibility to final account, our benchmarking application that we're using to benchmark projects. But ultimately, if we're to boil this down to sort of a common denominator, it's about recognizing that within the construction industry, we are a data rich industry in terms of like the data that we produce, but we are quite poor in terms of how we collect that, harvest it, and use it in a meaningful way to drive insight and make better decisions. So that's really the kickstarter in that process. Is very much a journey. It's a journey that we're sort of still on today. Yeah, so I suppose that's and I think just to echo the points that Ian was talking about, I think it's very much about collaborating, reaching out, and just seeing, reaching out to other members or other partners within the RICS Tech Partner Program really see what we can learn from each other in this, and sort of recognizing that we've all got different strengths in terms of where the places that we operate and how we can sort of integrate and learn from others. So yeah, excited to be part of this panel today.
Thank you very much, Edwin. Ivo?
Thank you, and a pleasure to be here today with all of you. On myself, Ivo, a managing partner here at the PropTech Connection, calling in today from Chicago. And what we do as a firm, I lead our origination function, so very much front-facing the network, clients, investors, and strategic partners. And what we do as a firm, we're an independent global real estate tech advisory firm. We have 5 offices, so Chicago, Amsterdam, Tokyo, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and headquartered in Sydney, Australia. And what we effectively do, we help real estate clients understand what global leaders are doing and source the relevant techs for their strategy or specific use cases. We represent a number of corporate venture capital funds where we assist in benchmarking and sourcing tech in line with their investment thesis. The third thing we do is we help PropTechs execute their growth strategies. So is Saudi Arabia a good market to go? And if so, what's your best go-to market, for example? And the fourth thing is around content, where we help events and industry groups or institutional players with content such as market reports or keynotes, workshops, etc. And what we have done and what we saw in market is there wasn't a centralized repository of unbiased real estate tech information. So we spend a lot of time and capital and knowledge mapping out the global ecosystem. So we mapped 10 million data points in the space, mapped and calibrated to our PropTech lens, and leverage our platforms to deliver insights to some of the largest real estate asset owners and managers. So that's who we are and what we do as a firm. And thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Ivo. And last but not least, Mary-Anne?
Hi, my name is Mary-Anne Bowring. So I'm a founder of Ringley Group, which is a group of companies, traditionally asset management, leasing, BTR, service charge, facilities management, solicitors, valuers, engineers, and I hope I didn't forget anybody. Probably I'm the one here who's an accidental PropTech entrepreneur. Only because we've spent so much money developing our own way of doing things, which has reduced the staff count in Treasury, for example, to 1 person to 17,000 properties because of robotics, machine learning, and other tricks, and connected huge parts of the business together for work reduction. So perhaps your PPM will actually close half of the actions on your fire risk assessment before you get out of bed. So we're very good at knowing how to share data and do things. The sort of customer face of our tech is Planet Rent, but also we've incubated Virgin Land by Ringley, which is a digital tech-enabled land search business bringing forward strat land for funds.
Thank you, Mary-Anne, and thanks to all of our panelists there for your introductions. So let's jump straight into the deep end and really start off defining what we mean by PropTech. So PropTech has become a bit of a buzzword in recent years, and it means different things depending on who you ask, as we'll hear from in a moment. For some of us, it's about real estate technology, while others see it as covering more of the entire property lifecycle, from construction and development to management and tenant experience. As we start this discussion, it's important to really explore what PropTech truly encompasses and how we separate meaningful innovation from the hype. So, yeah, I'd like to go around the table and hear your thoughts. So, Ian, if you don't mind, let's start off with you. So, traditionally, not coming from a tech background and coming from the real estate side, in your words, how would you define the term PropTech?
It's a really interesting question. It's very it's a contentious description, and I think especially since the arrival of subsequent related concepts around machine learning, artificial intelligence, you can see again how that same sense of, dare I say, confusion is playing out as people try to grapple with what do we mean when we're talking about these concepts, and how might they be implemented, how might they augment work streams, or even in some cases supersede those same work streams. I think PropTech, as it's come to be understood, seems to be a very narrowly defined concept now, and possibly problematically so. I think it relates, in many people's understanding, to companies that are specialized in the preparation analysis around data relating to the property industry. That's a very important part of it, and there are people out there who are doing that exceptionally well. Those component offers have become really important in some of our research modeling. But I would want to just draw some focus to wider work that is happening in the property space that could, in theory, also fall under the banner of PropTech. I'm talking more broadly about processes, design, automation, the deployment of self-service tool sets that may never see the light of day from a member of the public's point of view, or even from a client's point of view. The development of methodology, in particular, a lot of our time in research is concerned with methodology, and invariably that means those methodologies are expressed in code in order to be implemented and interoperable with various models. We are a property consultancy. Does that make such methodology or such design PropTech? That's an interesting debate. I don't think people would describe that as PropTech, and I'm left wondering whether we should be saying that we have anything to do with PropTech, or we are merely in the commissioning space vis-a-vis PropTech. So I think it's a conversation that we still need to unpack. It's also worth saying that when MHCLG, I guess, got very excited about PropTech, I think it was during Esther McVeigh's tenure at MHCLG, government was very keen to promote a model of PropTech centered around, plucky startups, minimal staff footprint, and acting on prerogative and inspiration to really kind of shake things up. And again, really important role that there are companies who are doing that. We've seen some amazing success stories that have followed that model. Got huge admiration for the likes of Tim Atherton, Tim Hopkin, who developed the Land app. And we've also got really well established relationships with companies like iGealize, Travel Time, where the focus is narrow, but the depth is exceptional in terms of a particular market theme. And their approach from the beginning is, we want to make this a plug-and-play capability. So that makes it very easy for a large property consultancy covering so many different market themes and so many different client perspectives to say, yes, we can reach towards that. We can make that part of our information ecosystem, and hence our advice to clients. But as I said, that they are perhaps the exception rather than the rule. And I would probably like more debate in the industry about what does actually constitute PropTech. Is it anyone doing anything related to tech in property? Still up for debate.
I think for me, it's very much that PropTech was originally tech for property and FinTech was tech for finance. The problem, of course, is that we think we're in PropTech, but actually 50% of what we're doing is FinTech. So then you end up a confused kid not knowing what you are. Then there's these layers of machine learning, AI and everything else that bolts and accelerates whatever your tech is. But originally, to me, it was like a retail, industrial, leisure. It was PropTech, FinTech, medical tech. That's how I've always pigeonholed it, I suppose.
I think maybe from our side, it's a question we are actually getting asked a lot. Obviously, it's in our name as the PropTech Connection, but I think the answer is rather simple, but also complex, right? So for us, it's a catch-all term that describes technology that impacts space at its broadest. And that obviously the complex answer is that it's constantly changing, right? Reflective of the changing nature of real estate. If you look at like a new asset class like data centers, right? Tech-enabled real estate, and we see a lot of things coming. So globally, the demarcation of traditional real estate sectors being eroded, right? COVID accelerated this as homes being used as offices, or for example, the hotelization of office through offerings in many amenity-centric assets, right? Are three examples we think illustrate this. So for us, what has shown is that the number of techs that are applicable to real estate have increased, right, over the last years, and this concept of PropTech encompasses categorizations like fintech, indeed, contact, mobility, climate tech, smart buildings, generative AI, and numerous other terms, right? So it's an ever-evolving kind of expanding definition for us. And another thing I think that is really important to note, there's a lot of nuance, right? We're talking about global markets, but there's very different focus in different areas, right? If you look in India, for example, the PropTech ecosystem, there's an excellent software capability, very much focused around resi, right? Institutionalization of real estate is just in the early stages there. If you look at Israel, for example, very strong focus in cyber, right? So and construction. US, it's a lot around transactions, right? And leveraging that. So and Europe more an ESG narrative. So there's a lot of geographical nuance from our perspective.
No, super. Just really interesting. Really interesting sort of comments. I suppose to just sort of play back for me, it's about definition as well. And I think it's difficult sometimes. We throw out these big terms. Prop tech. I think AI is another one which we previously discussed. BIM. We hear a lot. And these are sort of all-encompassing terms that mean a lot to everyone. I think at Turner and Townsend, do we consider what we're doing prop tech? Probably not, but the answer is maybe it is some way definitely in a definition. I think what we're trying to do is really, for us, we're trying to drive consistency in terms of our reporting, drive quality as well, collaboration and integration. But for us, it's all about the data as well. So by as a business working in a space, on projects, real estate, where there is a lot of sort of in terms of buildings are different, but the work is repeat. But then what patterns do we see when we report in a consistent way? What is happening to our contingency? What is happening to change? And when we bring that into a system and we collaborate on that system, then that will give us the data over time to drive that insight. For us, it's about that is our end goal in terms of what insight can we generate from the projects that we're working on, to better inform our clients in terms of future decision making. So for us, it's about data, really. That is what we're trying to achieve here. But data not for data's sake, but data to then drive insight.
We see ourselves as a data-led, vertically integrated business. So data drives decisions, data gets better outcomes. We've gone, as any business does, from being kind of reactive 20 years ago to then proactive, and now we're definitely in the predictive arena. And the only reason that we can be in a predictive arena is because of data. So data-led is how we pigeonhole ourselves. And of course, then the vertical integration is that tech simplifies the vertical work streams. So therefore, we're encroaching other people's territory through PropTech to reduce cost and improve the margin for the client ultimately.
Yeah.
Before we move on to data, I'm just curious on some points that you mentioned. Mary-Anne, you said how 50% of the work we do is fintech, and Ivo, you touched a lot on our relationships with industries like Contech. But I'm curious as to what you think PropTech refers to in terms of the whole property life cycle. Would you say that it encompasses construction, planning and development, so plan tech, Contech? Would you say that it's almost a overarching word for all of these industries, or do you think it should be treated separate?
Sorry, from our perspective, so we advise clients across every asset class or multi-sector. So for us, it's in its simplest terms, it's all tech impacting space, right? So, and if we look at, we work with some of the largest institutional players, we see obviously there, in terms of some hot topics, obviously leveraging AI, right, across their different business units and what are market leaders doing. But also this obviously data centers is a really hot space. We see a lot of interest there across the network, but these are builders, these are operators, these are owners, right? All with different needs. So for us, that's how we as a firm define PropTech and how we work with clients on that.
Thanks. Mary-Anne?
I mean, to me, the need to put a connotation of PropTech, FinTech, law tech really drives the legislative or compliance components behind it. Because look, fundamentally, all tech is a business process. It's as simple as that. When it becomes PropTech or FinTech, you know that you're either beginning to hanker towards, let's say, the FCA for FinTech and their compliance. For PropTech, it's going to be more around landlord and tenant law. For construction tech, it's going to be around procurement. And so I think, to me, it brings in the facets of the legal or the complex regulatory framework that you work within. And therefore, I do think the connotations are useful because otherwise you've just got business process tech with no law in it. And therefore, how are you going to get yourself or your clients safer governance-wise?
Yeah, great. So we've talked a lot about data then. So Edwin, I'd like to ask a question to you. You've mentioned how we're a data-rich industry. So in your opinion, why would you say that data is so crucial for success in the modern property sector?
So I think, well, ultimately, I suppose if we understand from a construction perspective, in terms of the build cost that we're working on, the cost of the components, how much buildings how much buildings cost, how we benchmark buildings, also understanding the cost throughout the building process as well, from inception to final account. But it's not just that, but it's also the risks that materialize, how we mitigate those risks, the changes that occur, how we manage those changes, and how those sort of changes develop and change over time. I think traditionally within construction, I think we have been quite I suppose actors within the industry have been quite protection. They protect their own data, and it's sort of like my data is sort of mine in terms of how we can make decision makers. So contractors, for instance, their data, in terms of the pricing is that's how they win work. That is how they estimate jobs. So I think, and there does need to be, I think, some form of democratization of that in terms of sort of more sharing, allowing that to become more the information to be more out there. And I know some organisations do that to a greater extent within the industry. But I think that is going to be the key enabler to bring success moving forward.
I think there's a willingness to share what you might call customer data, which might be the rents, because arguably it's in Zoopla, Rightmove or something anyway. The challenge is where we're using tech to, let's say, pre-price tenders. Let's pick an example: pre-price tenders for fire doors based on the 41 components and specific 41 different types of repair to, predict the tender before it comes. Why would we share that? Because it's not in the public domain. It's our IP. It's taken money to develop, and therefore benchmarking on the cost side of the world is going to be a hell of a lot slower, whereas the benchmark on the customer output side of the world is going to be a lot faster. This is why people share rents and rental growth and realise other platforms exist to support that, but no one wants to share what their gross to net is or their NOI is.
Just want to pick up on that point as well. I know we talked about risk and opportunity. I mean, to me, they're key tenets of why you would enable this type of data analysis, and in some ways that has always been a central concern of the property industry. For a given set of options or a given set of locations, you can increase the likeliness of success for a given venture if what are the demographic and economic and even physical constraints around that. I also want to pick up on what Mary-Anne said about just how bespoke some of these investigations actually need to be. To give you a flavour of some of the advice that we have to put into our own rural space, we've had to do analysis on nutrient runoff within whole river basin systems. In order to develop those models, we had to pull together monitoring data coming from the Environment Agency so that we can understand where certain farming activities, not necessarily good practice, might actually max out the nutrient runoff within a particular basin, and that actually blocks property and development activities downstream. So it's being able to consider systems in their entirety and work out what will be a very targeted intervention that generates a kind of a win-win condition. And again, it's just not possible to do that without data.
Has anyone? Ivo, did you want to jump in there?
No, I think some good points raised. I think for us more broadly, a few observations I would say is one. We're obviously now with all these AI capabilities, obviously accelerating at an incredibly rapid pace. We're in a race for data sets, right? I think that's observation one. I think observation two is from a PropTech perspective. I think for a lot of the adopters, the users of the tech, I think the easy wins are out there, right? But now it's all about integration, right? So bringing it all together, that's where the real magic and where the most impact can be made for clients.
And what do you think are the biggest issues with the data in that collaboration?
I think Mary-Anne mentioned a few. It really depends obviously on the client profile. For us as a firm, when we work with clients, we look across 160 different metrics, right? For users, so we look at what's your cyber strategy, We'll look into pricing. We'll look in terms of risk profile. So it's very hard, right? And so for us, what we saw in market effectively is that, tech budgets are increasing, right? It's very hard for people to have visibility of what's happening in market, right? What's happening in the US, Europe, Asia, where do you go, right? So you have events, you have investors, people pushing agendas, that whoever is paying is obviously gets visibility, but there's no data-led intel in terms of, doing this at scale. And that for us, that's an opportunity. The big guys all want to understand what's happening globally in that space, right? And the challenge you have is there's many companies doing similar things, right? So how do you know? Every asset is different, every portfolio is different. So how do you know which tech is best suited to meet your specific needs, right? So for us, sometimes the same asset, different owner has different tech needs.
I'm just gonna, thanks, Ivo. I'm just gonna throw in one additional thing that is, I think, really important whenever we have a conversation about data is collating data in that structured format. And I think we're going back to construction. I think that's where there is a lot of data, but are we collecting it in the structured format? And I think just to bring in the RICS, with initiatives like new rules of measurement that you've sort of rolled out, and some of these initiatives are putting out best practice, but it's about bringing the industry in line to a set of code in terms of how we measure. I know you've got the IPMS that is rolled out globally in terms of measurement standards, and really creating that consistency that there is an apples for apples approach in terms of what we're comparing. And I think that's data is great in its own right, but data in its data without structure is somewhat meaningless. And bringing structure around that is the bit that then drives that analysis. And I think Mary-Anne, you brought that thing in terms of the tender, in terms of the doors, and really understanding. You've got to understand, well, are these fire doors comparable? Is the fitting comparable? Is where are the locations that these being put in, that they are being installed? And I think we have the same sort of challenges within our company in terms of understanding the regional variances and how we model for that, but the ability to then, when we're working on these platforms within our business, it's about then when we're working on projects, when we're reporting in a consistent way. We are managing our costs in a consistent way. We're reporting from a project management perspective in a reporting way. We are reporting on risk in a way that's kind of coordinated across all projects. That is then going to lead to that insight.
I mean, as Ivan said, because buildings are unique, fire doors has been a nice module for us, because it's the only module where there's 41 faults and 41 solutions, but you can't replicate that to the drain, the window, the floor, the roof, and everything else, and it gets incredibly complicated incredibly quickly. But we've found two things really. Firstly, in terms of location, our tech's all equipped with QR codes. So literally you are using a QR code to repair the right fire door, and that makes that very, very easy. QR codes have also been used to drive engagement. So if the first thing you see when you open your washing machine is a QR code to encourage you to get your app out and learn how to use it, you're preventatively using it to prevent damage. And the third observation really is that we've really, really fudged the traditional boundaries of the job. Now, to be able to run 17,000 properties with only one person in Treasury is probably largely unheard of. But that's done because there's just-in-time stock mechanisms everywhere, so you can't clone last year's budget without dealing with stray expenditure. It's just one example. But if you have enough just-in-time stock mechanisms, you're actually getting the right person to do the job. And every year we sit down as a board and change everybody's job descriptions, because generally they're losing 10% of their previous job. In theory, getting a pay rise because they're more valuable to you, and embracing more customer responsibility, as effectively, as I say to my 6-year-old son, in the future, you've either got to drive the AI or be driven by it. So we are very much in a world where we're understanding jobs are changing very quickly. That's a real benefit to the people, and they are becoming clever enough to live by exception reporting, understand the rules behind the system. So we're dotting, if you like, the flow chart of how a page or a function works is on it, so that people can actually see everything it's supposed to do, which gives confidence, of course.
I think that's a really interesting point as well, Mary-Anne, and I think it's one of the things that we're sort of grappling as well. the need for more data analysts as well. So, in terms of, project managers and cost managers that would traditionally work, that work within our business. And again, we're excellent at managing cost and project managing the projects, but then we need the data analyst to understand the data that's coming out. But then it's a symbiotic relationship, really, because then the data analyst can tell us the trends in terms of what they're seeing in the data, but then they need to come back to us as the professionals to interpret that data. So I think the role of the data analyst is increasing, but again, it's that sort of the need for the professional to interpret that. I don't think is ever going to go away. But I do agree with you in terms of the fundamental nature of the jobs that we're working in is being shifted by the technology that is out there.
I think it's a really good point, Edwin. For us, we couldn't agree more. Data scientists are going to be in highest demand in the real estate space. I think it's one, but two, you actually think about it. You see obviously a lot of the large players, right, in this market, but we think a lot of real estate businesses are trying to become tech enabled, right? I personally think that the inverse, tech companies becoming real estate companies, is a much more likely scenario. If you look at I always like to mention this, but after fishing and hunting, real estate is the least digitized industry, right? So obviously huge asset class, and everybody knows this. You have a lot of these ESG narratives, obviously now with Trump backwalking here, something in the US, but it's much more on a city level in the US. Europe, obviously nationwide, much bigger push, capital coming in, energy assets coming together, lots of capital coming in. So if you want to do things at scale in that space, the only way to do it quickly is with tech, right? So we think if you look at companies like Apple, Google, LinkedIn, or Microsoft, obviously behind that, have a lot of the data of with your phone and what you're doing in these assets. So we think now with AI capabilities, lots of cash, tech companies coming in here, we think it's a very likely scenario.
Yeah, and I think
2 points around the data scientists in particular. It's such an interesting point. I think regardless of what we would say PropTech is or isn't, I think we can all agree that companies big or small will be transformed by the type of skill that will be placed next to these huge libraries and volumes of data. But one of the points I wanted to make on that is that we won't typically be pulling those people from the property space. So they are agnostic as to the industry that they're in. They developed a specialism that's technical in nature. So if we're recruiting, or if someone resigns from our technical team, maybe a third of the time they might stay in the property industry. So there's always a danger that there's a kind of a cognitive dissonance between these very elaborate models and the strategies built on them and the domain understanding, given how specialized some of these sectors are. So finding ways to keep that skill and perspective very, very closely aligned to our agency and advisory functions, that's been a really key focus for us. That's a real immediate example of how PropTech has
I couldn't
changed.
agree more. For 20 years, when we've been recruiting accountants, I've always said that there's property accountants who understand landlord and tenant law, and there's accountants who can go to a factory and sell cakes. And it's the nuances, again, the same things now applying to tech. We get the bright grads, the AI masters, but we've still got to teach them the law, the compliance, because I think unlike a lot of professions, property is always multidiscipline. Everything from politics to building pathology to finance to, I could go on and on.
There is an asset, there's a building.
Yeah, most professions, if I am an insurance broker, my law and my compliance starts and stops with insurance. But we've got to go the whole circle, as it were.
Yeah.
How do you think that we can encourage greater collaboration between property companies and tech innovators to develop and implement solutions that are effective?
Most have got to catch up. It's a starting point.
I think before we get to that point, Aaliyah, I think it was great. I know it was one of the things I've just written down here. I think collaboration is the key. And again, before we sort of get into the hows and whats, I just think understanding that again, that relationship between the data scientist and the professional, what you're saying, Mary-Anne, a building is a building. You're always going to need that building surveyor to be able to attend and have a look and just really understand. And yes, we can model for defects over within a certain property type over a certain duration. You can really understand in terms of narrow that down. But that relationship between the professional, I think, is always going to be key. And I think Ivo, just the relationship between tech and real estate. I think it's about bringing the parties together to enable each other and sort of recognizing that with each other's strengths and coming together within that space. And I think as a final point, and again, Mary-Anne, you did make this point. We're always going to be governed, in terms of the regulatory bodies that we adhere to, the compliance and just the law that we're governed by. So which is important. But then again, that's role of the RICS that come in and sort of set a lot of the standards that we work to.
One of the barriers that we've got is the ability to cross boundaries, because we're at the stage where clients are talking to us about, well, we've got, let's say, 12 pieces of kit or different systems just for the UK, and another 12 in Denmark, another 12 in Germany. And it's the ability to understand how to get access to cross territories, cross boundaries, because at the end of the day, financially, 1 + 1 is still 2. And the law is bespoke, but it's rules driven. And if you've isolated that in your tech early on, crossing boundaries shouldn't be difficult. And the ambition that we have certainly is if you could have one piece of tech across the whole of Europe and the US, then that's a killer USP.
But I think it's a good point, Mary-Anne, right? I think in market, obviously, with high interest rates, a lot of the funds have been struggling and many are struggling or will drawn to a close, right? So a lot of these techs have obviously raised cash and have really good products, but cannot scale, right? And what we're seeing in market across our client base and a lot of strategic partners that we have is there's a larger appetite to consolidate or buy techs and integrate it into their systems, or bring, obviously a lot of PE funds now coming in as well. For us, it's, the real estate space is hard, right? If you're a tech company, if you wanted to sell into the Knight Franks, the CBREs of this world, the sales cycles tend to be very long, right? But then it's quite sticky, right? Once you're in, you're in. So, it's much more predictable in terms of revenue. So we see, on the PE side of things, a lot of activity right now. We think that will continue in the upcoming 2-3 years as well.
One question I did want to ask, which is going back a little bit off topic, but you've touched on it, Ivo, about the importance of choosing the right technology. And one question that we get asked a lot working on the Tech Partner Program is, how can we avoid falling in the trap of chasing every new technology and instead focus on solutions that deliver real value and address real specific challenges facing our sector? So what advice would we all give to real estate companies that want to adopt technology, but don't know how, and I've almost fell in that trap of chasing the trends?
Maybe one of the ways those decisions can be de-risked to an extent is to just apply maybe a little bit of stratification around the offer. So on the face of it, the PropTech offer might present information which drives decision making, and there might be some element of the kind of the user engaging with that data, varying parameters of a model and receiving output from that. But there is a second level, which is a kind of the meta-analysis. So the fact that the user even ran that report at that location with that timestamp, and who that client is and what their overarching strategy is, over time, that information is far more valuable. I mean, it's like your Tesco club card, basically. So one of the things that we have to do very fastidiously is assess, does the use of a particular tool over time concentrate higher level understanding inside the organization or outside? And when I say that higher level knowledge, it might be related to market insights over time, or it might even be relating to our own agents' behavior. But if that behavior is observable outside the organization and not inside, something's not right with that solution. So that's one thing I would suggest that maybe people consider on both sides of the equation. Where are you concentrating knowledge?
I think maybe a good point, Ian. I think for us, it's all about driving an ROI, right? So there's there's a lot of noise in the space, or obviously chasing these new trends. But at the end of the day, it's all I mean, are you increasing your NOI? Are you reducing costs, right? So it's all about driving a tangible outcome at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, year on year, our tech program has gone faster and got bigger. But I can absolutely plot it to us. In theory, our headcount has gone down or stayed the same, while the business has quadrupled. And also the ability that the governance has got safer. I mean, we are really enjoying working as a predictive company, predicting what clients need, resourcing things before they need it. And the cost saving of not having to chase things and not getting chased by customers, and right first time. In the right first time equation, if I go back 10, 15 years, let's say the finance department might have had 150 letters a week. These days it's probably less than 20. But the business is 4 to 6 times the size. I mean, it's because when things are right first time, you have an easier business, and therefore you can accelerate your tech journey even faster, because you're not bothered with all the, let's call it, the noise and disruptions of a business. Especially most noise and disruptions are actually quite mundane, time consuming and difficult. And as tech takes over those bits, your business just becomes so much more strategic. It's as simple as that.
Okay.
Typical example might be if a property manager is authorising an invoice. In the old days, they authorised it. Now they actually do the finance work of coding it correctly. They do the M&E engineer's job of writing down the fault and how the cost breakdown is there. So once you've got that in your database, you can then start comparing the lift at Block A against all other lifts just on the component of a motor. And then you build out the mechanisms to say, well, what's this quote for lift motor? How much is the quote? £8,000. Well, that's ridiculous, because here's 25 comparables that it should be 3,600. And then your decision making gets better, your client performance gets better, your complaints go down, because everything really does become reasonable.
I think for me, in answer to your question, I think it's just sometimes going back to the basics and just saying, what actually are we trying to achieve here? And I think, as you said earlier, just not diving straight first. It's not tech for tech's sake. It's there to drive value and just create efficiencies and really just sort of sometimes that sort of step back, step forward is really important. What is it we're trying to achieve? What is the end goal? And then allowing the right tech to facilitate that.
And one of the common issues of adopting technology is people really having trust in the output of these technologies, especially AI. Taking this into account, how would you say that we can move forward, helping people build trust in these outputs and
trust in
and trust
AI?
in
I
the
don't
tech?
think are quite in the same sentence at the moment. Trust and a desire for AI to produce trust is in the same sentence, but I don't think they're the same there yet.
I'd say one of the useful things about the focus on is that it has allowed people to understand maybe the creative aspect of this modeling and data analysis. So it's funny because a lot of the trajectory in the, maybe you'd say, the kind of the PropTech space, that was pointing us towards inevitably techniques that are far more statistical based on probability, like machine learning, agent-based modeling. These are all really compelling when applied in the property space, but I found comprehension in some cases didn't fully cohere until this conversation around AI really exploded, post ChatGPT. So yes, completely agree, Mary-Anne, the trust issue is a real problem, but it's a useful inflection point to allow us to focus on topics that frankly we were looking at anyway, but now there's an additional impetus to organize input data because it enables A, B, and C. Badged broadly under that heading of, yes, these are AI-related processes.
I think there's still a early debate on what is the right quantum to feed AI to learn. For example, in our land search business, the advice that we've got and the let's call it the route map that we've got says we need 250,000 250,000 land parcels to get AI up to a sensible level to understand what a land agent actually does. Now, that's quite a cost to fuel, whereas, for example, in learning how to answer data-led questions from the database, well, that's very easy. It's just got to address it with the please and thank you and the weather. So it's a complexity of what you've got and how many human tasks or pieces of a data array you're trying for it to interpret.
Well, we're on this topic about AI, why not address the elephant in the room that probably affects most people, is this fear of, is it going to take our jobs and what does it mean for our roles moving forward? So does anyone have any thoughts on how that's going to impact the property industry? Is it going to replace
We
jobs?
believe by the end of the year, we should have AI doing first draft of all staff emails in key departments, because if AI can look through the last, whatever it is, 10 years emails on one site, it can learn about the nuances only of that site. And if you can add to it data overlays of, let's say, the demand date, the year end date, the rubbish date, and everything else, it will actually be able to do a pretty good job. Would I ever turn it on to completely replace it? No, because property is very personal. It's a relationship business. But would it reduce the stress and increase the productivity and save people having to go and search databases for 5 different pieces of information to answer one email? Of course it will. But again, I believe that will help us lift off in terms of strategy to, bring your personality to work and delight your customers, because if you've been given the data to do a good job.
I think it's a really interesting question, and I think there's probably two interesting things to mention. I was in a conference in Riyadh in Saudi last year, and former Prime Minister of the UK, Tony Blair, was there, and he said something interesting. I think he said, currently, obviously, AI has access to 300,000 years of knowledge, operating at an approximate IQ of, let's say, 50 or 60, and it's obviously gaining good traction, right? And he mentioned that the next iteration, of a human with an IQ of 150 will have, significant impact. But he said once it reaches an IQ of 200, that's obviously where we're in this truly incredible utilization. I think it's one interesting thing to look at it. But the other one is, I think Sam Altman, so the CEO of OpenAI, and I think today or 3 days ago, they announced a $500 billion investment across with some other partners in the US at the White House office. But he said that roughly 80% of jobs are exposed to AI disruption in some kind of form. So is it going to impact? Yes, significant. What is it going to be? Hard to predict.
I think things are going to change. I think everyone is, everyone is cognizant of that. I think about the idea of replacing. I think it is strong. I think it's more about enabling and enhancing what we do, changing what we do. I think the jobs are going to change. The way we operate is going to change. The way we use tech is going to change. Is that going to replace? I don't. In some instances, perhaps. But I think when we get definitely to the more technical elements, I suppose that definitely within the spheres where we're operating at Townsend, in terms of that more the consultancy, that really sort of professional approach where we're operating with professional guidance, a lot of complexity, a lot of different things that we need to consider. Every real estate project is different, every location is different, every construction build is going to be different. The risks in those different locations are going to be different. So yes, you can model for a certain a certain percentage, but there is always going to be that bit where you are going to need an element of input. And I think we had the sort of similar, not exactly the same, but I remember when BIM was released, or when there was a lot of buzz around BIM, and this is gonna eradicate the need for property professionals, and we're going to be modeling maintenance, and we're going to be modeling this, we're going to be modeling that. And I think that hasn't happened, but we can't say that BIM hasn't changed the way we operate. So I think AI is going to change how we work, but not going to replace.
Well, we've been through several massive changes. We've been from manual ledgers to finance systems. We've been through typing pools to self-typing. When I started work, I might have dictated 50 letters a week. Now it's kind of 200 emails a day. So the speed at what we work has changed, and AI is in our iteration will change the speed that people work at. Now that either goes to margins or possibly goes to higher wages because the cost of living, cost of property. I suspect that it will, go a little bit to both. But I think it's the speed at this stage in the next 10 years before we predict that computers really can serve humans. I went to a restaurant in Manchester. My dinner was delivered by a robot, but he didn't turn up to collect my empties.
Thanks. I think we summarised that really well, and it was a real good closer to this discussion. So thank you all for this thoughtful discussion. I think there's one thing that stands out, and it's that PropTech, it's not just about technology, it's about people. It's about finding out solutions that address real challenges, collaborating together, and improving the way we work to ultimately create better outcomes for everyone. At RICS, we're committed to supporting our members, especially as they navigate through this changing landscape. And I hope today's panel discussion has given you some useful insights and some ideas to take forward. So thank you for our panelists for sharing their insights and to our listeners as well. But as a takeaway, let's keep the conversation going. There's so much more to explore in this space, and I look forward to discussing this in the future. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aaliyah.
Thank you.